All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm super excited about today's guests. They are the authors of Sugarproof, Dr. Michael Goran and Dr. Emily Ventura. And we'll get into their bios here in a second, but I just want to start the show by saying this is a really important topic. What we're feeding our children will affect not only how they feel, how they learn, and how they behave today, but it affects their future. And it's our job as their parents to really look out for them and to try to limit the sugar. Unfortunately, so many of our processed foods today make it really easy to double down on sugar with our kids. And Emily and Dr. Goran are giving us the tools to change that. So here's a little bit about each of them. Dr. Michael Goran is a professor of pediatrics at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, which is affiliated with the Keck School of Medicine at USC. Fight on. He's a program director for diabetes and obesity at the Saban Research Institute, and he holds the Dr. Robert C. and Veronica Atkins Endowed Chair in Childhood Obesity and Diabetes. His research has been continuously funded by the National Institutes of Health and other foundations for the past 30 years, and he has published over 350 professional peer-reviewed articles and reviews. Dr. Emily Ventura is a nutrition educator, public health advocate, writer, and cook. She's a California Bay Area native, and she completed her undergraduate studies at Cornell. She went on to complete her master's in public health and doctorate of philosophy in preventative medicine at the University of Southern California. Emily has 10 years of research experience in public health with a focus on dietary strategies for the prevention of obesity, diabetes, and cancer. Her research has been published in scientific journals such as Obesity, the Journal of Pediatrics, and the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. Most importantly, today's episode is going to be very realistic because both Michael and Emily are parents, and they understand what each of us are going through and how much effort it takes to take care of our children and protect them from the hidden sugars that are in every single processed child's food. Anyways, let's get to the show because there's some really good applicable tips on today's episode. Dr. Emily and Dr. Michael, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I am, as I was gushing before we started, obsessed with the fact that you wrote this book, Sugarproof. Their new book, Sugarproof, The Hidden Dangers of Sugar That Are Putting Your Child's Health at Risk and What You Can Do, I think is the book that all of the parents listening need to buy and read, because as we were talking about before we started, it's amazing to me to have clients in my practice worry so much about their sugar, their blood sugar balance, the added sugars in their food. And it seems to go out the window with kids. Give them a pouch, 5, 8, 10 grams of sugar, hand them the blueberry muffin at the coffee shop, the gummy vitamins. It sort of all adds up. And so I just want to get into what motivated you guys. I'm sure it's like the fire that's in me right now, but what motivated you guys to write this book for yourselves?
But it's kind of related to what you're talking about there, Kelly. And, first of all, thank you so much for having us on. It's so lovely to meet you. But I've been doing research in this area for 20, 30 years and wanted to find a way to get the latest research out to the public. There's so many great tools. There's a lot of information written about sugar in kids. We wanted to bring it all together. But for me, there was a sudden realization of several things. One, starting with we know kids are consuming more sugar, but it's different types of sugar. We can talk about that later, but it's those different types of sugar that appear to be more damaging to kids. And why are kids more affected by sugar? This was another kind of sudden realization for me. Kids are actually more vulnerable to those damaging effects of sugar. First of all, because they have a greater preference for sweetness. So kids are born liking sweetness. And this was supposed to be protective, to get them to like breast milk, which is sweet, and avoid toxic foods from the forest floor. Mm-hmm. But now kids are not crawling around the forest floor, they're crawling around the grocery store, where 80% of kids' foods have some form of added sugar. And once that added sugar comes into kids, that built-in preference gets amped up. So they have even greater preference for sweetness. And then once sugar comes into their bodies, it can actually derail the healthy process of brain development, of other organ development. We can talk in more detail about that, but the key issue is whilst organs are being built, like the brain, the gut, the liver, that process can be derailed by sugar and different types of sugar.
Let's get into that. How is sugar derailing the process of organ growth and brain development and I'm sure microbiome proliferation? Like, let's get to the nitty gritty.
Yeah, well, I mean, microbiome is a good example because we know the microbiome is developed in the first few years of life. And we know that the microbiome is affected by nutrition. So that's a pretty clear link. So, and third of all, in our research, we were the first to show that sugars affected the gut microbiome. So if you put all those things together, too much sugar during microbiome development can alter the fate of how that microbiome will look. And we know that microbiome is set during childhood, and once you have it, it's very hard to change, right? So if it's disrupted by sugars during early process, then that can have a long-lasting effect. And that's a more tangible effect, but the same is true for the brain. And studies, again, mostly in animal models, will show that if you expose a developing rat or mouse to too much sugar during the period of brain growth, then that sugar will alter the neuronal development that's happening in the brain, and then it's set for life, so it can have a lasting effect. Another very obvious example is tooth decay, which many parents will associate with sugar. And the question is, why are kids more vulnerable? And this is a tangible example because the problem is that too much sugar causes gut bacteria to produce acid. Acid destroys teeth, but baby teeth, they don't have the full amount of enamel. They're not fully developed enough to protect from that acid. That's a very clear-cut, tangible example. And I could list many other examples, but the point is that organs are being built and they're not built to be exposed to all this sugar and different types of sugar.
Yeah, it's so true. And their bodies are just so much smaller. We're exposing them to the same amount of sugar as some adults. Yeah. Dr. Emily, what about you? What motivated you to get behind this book and be a co-author?
I've been interested in community nutrition education since 1998, really, when I was still doing my undergraduate degree, and I was home in California for summer, and I had a chance to be the first intern at Alice Waters' Edible Schoolyard project. So I got to work with kids, in the garden, harvesting, growing, and then bringing that into the kitchen and cooking with it. And that's really what got me hooked and made me realize just how important edible education is, and helping give kids that sensory experience of growing things and cooking things and tasting, and just the exposure to fresh food is so important. And then I ended up going to grad school at USC, and I worked for Michael and had a chance to be involved in his research and teach in the research setting as well, and help conduct some of that research and run some of the analyses, and just realizing, more and more how much the quality of carbohydrate intake plays a role in metabolic health. And then some of this compelling new research that Michael and his group have been doing, showing how much further the effects go beyond metabolism, are just really convicting. And I think what really solidified it for me, though, is becoming a mom. So I have two boys, ages 5 and 8 now. And so it helped me understand the issues at an even deeper level, because, when you're in the thick of it and you realize ideally this is what you want your kids to be having, but this is the real world. And, there's just influences that are oftentimes beyond what you're expecting. And so I think one thing that's so important to us with this book is having a really practical approach of making sure, that we're not being over restrictive, and we're still, allowing people to enjoy some sweet treats, not coming up with some sort of unrealistic, restrictive perspective on it is really important. So I think my motivation was to try and put together all of these thoughts that I've had, as an educator and a researcher and a mom, to try and contribute to Michael's body of knowledge and research and his experience as a dad as well.
Yeah, I think, we can all take the science approach and look at the research and see what's coming out on, anything from industrial seed oils to like sugar, to pick a topic. It can be really scary, or there can be a lot of fear mongering out there around like, what am I going to feed my kids, and wanting to be restrictive with ourselves or with our children. And then being a parent and going to the 10 birthday parties a year or more where you're like, okay, am I not letting my kid have this? How am I balancing this out? What are some of the ways that what are some of the recommendations, like off the top of your head, that you think are realistic and approachable that you teach and educate moms and dads to incorporate into their child's life to balance that sugar?
Do you want me to start on that, Michael?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we put a big focus on breakfast, starting with that, just because we talk about the sugar roller coaster. And just once, if you get on that sugar roller coaster first thing in the morning, either you yourself or your children, everything sort of goes haywire from the start. And if you have a lot of things, sweet cereal or juice or toast with jam, that causes a big spike in blood sugar and then a crash. And then the body's response to recover from that is to seek out more sweet foods, a quick dose of glucose to restore blood sugar levels. And I know, as a parent too, that's really hard. If I eat that way, I'm a terrible parent. I'm so irritable. And I've seen the same thing with my kids. So we focus a lot on breakfast, and it's along the lines of the things that you're suggesting with your Fab 4, for sure. That's a great combination to stay off the roller coaster in the morning. And then also liquid sugar is a big focus. So if families are, having juice as daily staples, or sodas or energy drinks or sports drinks, we suggest to try and prioritize slowly working to water those down and then eventually eliminate them.
I love that. I mean, that's a great way to wean people off of it and then make the recommendations. Like if you're like celebrating or if you're out and it's sort of like the only option, okay, fine. But like, what are you controlling in your house and how are you starting your day? I mean, I've seen it definitely in my practice I know intermittent fasting and people not eating breakfast because they're not hungry or whatever has become really popular. But always my fear is what I don't care when your break fast is, like, what are you breaking your fast with? Because that's going to subsequently affect all those other meals, all the cravings you have. And I see it, I don't know if you guys have seen it with your children. I see it with Sebastian, he'll be 2 on Friday, and, just seeing his body's response to sugar. I remember the first time we gave him a popsicle, and it's this like local little homemade from fruit popsicle stand, but he was off the walls, and his crash is so much more emotional at almost 2 years old that you're like, this wasn't the best call. He didn't need that. I think he needs it. I think he needs to celebrate, but does he really? Which is interesting enough. So you guys talk about medical, physical, and academic health for children and how sugar affects that. I'd love for you to dive into why it's so problematic to children relative to adults.
Yeah, so, kind of continuing on from what I was talking earlier about how once inside the body, sugar can be disruptive, and also mentioning different types of sugar. Here we get to talk a little bit about fructose versus glucose. So fructose in particular, I think most of your listeners probably know about high fructose corn syrup, which became notorious for its bad effects in the body because of the higher amount of fructose. But it turns out there's lots of other high fructose type sugars as well that are becoming more popular these days, but have a healthier halo around them, like fruit-based sugars, for example. But at the end of the day, they're still introducing fructose into the body. And that's one of the main starting points of the problems, because this is not necessarily to do with the calories. Okay, so we're not talking about too much calories. We're not talking about kids being overweight. We're talking about really the metabolic impact of things coming into the body. And fructose in particular is one that's problematic. And that's because, again, for babies aren't even born with the ability to process fructose properly, because they weren't normally expected to be consuming fructose because there isn't any in breast milk normally. So starting right there, fructose, if a baby is consuming sugars, including fructose, then because it's not absorbed properly, you'll get malabsorptive problems, tummy problems, affects the microbiome. So starting right there. Then once fructose is absorbed into the body, because the more that occurs, the more the system will adapt and become able to process fructose. Then you get other negative side effects, because too much fructose, and we're not talking about the fructose that you would get from eating an apple or a bowl of berries. We're talking about the fructose that you'd get from drinking juice or from a fruit-based sugar, etc. And under those conditions, the fructose is taken up by the liver, and the liver converts that fructose into fat. And that fat can get stuck in the liver and contribute to fatty liver disease, which is increasing in children and adults, and is a very dangerous problem if left unchecked. Or that fat can be exported from the liver and cause high cholesterol and high lipids in the blood, which we know is the starting point for cardiovascular disease. Now, some of these problems, some kids do have fatty liver disease, and that's very unfortunate. But for the most part, it's a slowly developing process, but it starts in childhood. And because it's slow, it's also asymptomatic. So this makes it harder to diagnose and know that there's an underlying problem. But this process of fatty liver, of developing cholesterol in the blood, and diabetes risk, it all starts in childhood, and it all can be linked back to too much sugar and fructose in particular. So those will be some of the clinical things. And then maybe, Emily, you can talk about some of the academic effects, for example, on learning, memory, focus, concentration. As you mentioned, with your 2-year-old son, most parents will recognize that but it's also difficult because it's very variable. So Emily, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about those issues?
Yeah, so there's been some interesting studies that have looked at things between some family habits and academic performance on standardized tests. We all know standardized tests aren't the greatest measure in general, but some of these studies are still informative. So even findings looking like how eating vegetables at the evening meal can influence your child's performance on an academic test in large scale studies. Or some of the
in a positive way,
right? Can improve. And then some of these other studies that look at ability to recall information and sugar consumption. So kids are better able to remember what they've heard if they've had less sugar. And then also moving into some of the more effects on mood. We know from interesting studies that have looked at momentary ecological analysis, asking kids how they're feeling at a given moment and then linking that to what they've recently eaten. They tend to be more anxious and stressed if they've had sugar. And then some of the larger scale studies in adults show links like sugar-sweetened beverages have been linked to depression in adults. So we think it's important to set that foundation with kids at a young age, trying to help them avoid some of these longer term consequences for physical and mental health.
Definitely. I mean, when I'm riding a blood sugar roller coaster and maybe incorporated too much sugar in my diet, my ability to recall information, have a very fluid conversation, deal with the stress of my inbox in life is definitely affected. So you can only imagine how that affects young children in such a developmentally profound stage of life. What do you make? I know you're not necessarily about restricting because it's children. Do you make recommendations based on this research and how to balance their diet or have veggies at dinner? What are some tips to balance that out to keep their mood level and their ability to learn high?
I think some of the important things you can do when your kids are really little are just thinking about what staples you have in the house and what you're using for snacks and what you're serving at breakfast and what kind of beverages you have on hand. And then as you raise your children, I think it's important to just really start to involve them in the conversation. So that body awareness that you talked about is something that you can start talking with your children about at a really young age. We mentioned in the book the phrase, you feel how you eat. And I think a lot of us, even as adults, aren't totally tuned into that. But that's something that you can start talking with your kids about at a young age. If they're asking for something really sweet at breakfast, you can have the discussion, well, if you've had that, how much you feel. And with my kids, I don't want always to be the one to tell them what they're going to experience. So sometimes they're going to experience that and that's fine. And I'm not going to overly control it. My kids were actually raised in Italy at first, where breakfast is really sweet. So especially if you go out to a bar, which is really common to have, a pastry or a coffee, there's not too much to choose from there. And so sometimes when we're there, I'll let my kids have that, but we all realize the effects on all of us if we eat that way. So it's just a good point of discussion, I think. And they start to realize, okay, yeah, that might not make me feel so good. And just sort of patterning in the family, what they get used to, I think is so important. So if kids are used to having a vegetable every night at dinner or at lunch as well, they'll start to notice when it's gone. When it's not, I know this the hard way. Actually, it was a couple of weeks ago. I was having a really stressful day and I made pasta and I didn't make a vegetable, which is completely not typical of me, but I thought maybe I could get away with it. And I saw what happened and my kids were like, Mom, where's the vegetable? I need something green. But okay.
Yeah, it's a good foundation to start. And I think, I have seen clients who've tried to bring veggies in after not including them in their child's diet, not having that fresh, I'm not saying fresh produce, but fresh vegetables, because I think a lot of kids love the taste. I mean, we just talked about it. They love the taste of sugar. They're wired to eat sugar from when they're born, right? So now whether that's breast milk or grapes, they're like, this is delicious. But to really have to bring it back after not including it when they are young is so much harder than having it just constantly be the way it is and the foundational way that you eat. I think that for me, I do feel really blessed that like I've sort of just always used the Fab Four with Sebastian. I'm like, okay, there's a protein on his plate. There's some healthy fat. There's some avocado. Okay, he has broccoli. There's some, chicken or whatever it is. Like I'm just looking for those base components for blood sugar balance. And if we're adding berries or there's like a dessert situation happening after, at least I know like, okay, there's some balance there and we're filling him up with that stuff first, sort of just to crowd out what would be the sugary, like processed acellular carbohydrates that have its massive effects on kids. I mean, that's not even like my nutritionist background talking. That's just like being a mom now and knowing like if it's not around, they're used to it, they'll notice it. And if you've never brought it around and you're bringing it in, they might revolt a little bit. But
it's true. And you can be gradual about it too. That works really well for a lot of families. We have 2 challenges. One is a 7-day challenge where we suggest taking out sugar entirely for a week, kind of going cold turkey. And that brings a lot of awareness to where all the hidden sugars are. And, it can be really effective after just a couple of days, even, once that initial kind of irritability wears off of, withdrawal symptoms of sugar, then families quickly find some new alternatives. But that doesn't work for everybody. So we also have a 28-day challenge that we propose where you can go more gradual over the course of a month and just slowly make some changes.
I love that.
You can also do that under the radar too, which several families ended up doing that we worked with, because maybe there was some initial resistance from a partner or kids, and whoever is running the kitchen and buying all the groceries can make some under the radar changes, and probably make a big impact by changing up the brand of breakfast cereal or not buying juice, or not bringing soda into the house. And suddenly everybody will adapt pretty quickly. Kids are resilient. They may rebel for the first day or two, but they're resilient and will actually appreciate the difference.
I love that so much, because it can feel overwhelming as a parent to say like, okay, now I've realized how much sugar I brought into the house and now I need to pull it back. How am I going to do this? How am I going to make those healthier swaps? But if you just think about it like elevating those ingredients that you have in your cabinet or your refrigerator and starting to count those grams of sugar or those tablespoons of sugar that you're eliminating with those little swaps. And maybe it's kind of how, when I think about cleaning out someone's beauty, their cosmetics have endocrine disrupting chemicals or their, cleaning ingredients, is the same sort of thing in our pantry and our fridge, right? You're running out of ketchup and picking a cleaner option that doesn't have added sugar, but you're still getting that flavor.
It's confusing because there's over 200 names for sugar. And so it's often hard to identify whether there's hidden sugar in something or not. So we talk about this in Sugarproof, trying to help decode all those different names. And the food companies have gotten very smart at disguising them and making things look healthy and fun. And even the best of us have made the mistake of coming home with some new product that sounds and looks great, and then you look closely and you see it's full of added sugar or a sweetener or something.
Yeah. And it is, like you guys said, it's not that your kids will never have sugar. And I'd love to unpack some of that too, but it's being able to identify it, knowing what your ceiling is, like how much can children safely consume. And then saying like, okay, if I am going to make the choice to make a baked, I told you Sebastian's birthday is Friday. I'm thinking about like, okay, well, what am I going to do for his birthday cake or muffin or whatever we're doing? What sugars are the healthiest? Are alternative sugars healthy? So let's unpack some of that for our audience, because I know what they're thinking, which is probably like, well, okay, I swapped monk fruit, or is date sugar or coconut sugar really that much better for you? Because you talked about sugars having halos. So let's do, how much can children safely consume? Are there healthy alternatives? And how do you feel about alternative sweeteners?
Yeah, great. That's 3-4 questions, all great questions wrapped in, and it all revolves around your birthday cake.
Yeah. So I'm making a birthday cake. What am I doing?
Yeah, it's a critical question because birthday cakes are important, birthdays are important, celebrations are important, and we don't want to lose sight of that. Absolutely important part of growing up. So what do? So in terms of how much, then we think the new dietary guidelines that are expected soon, at least the scientific recommendations, was a big change. The scientific recommendations are 0 added sugars for 0 to 2 years of age. Now, coconut sugar is an added sugar. Maple syrup is an added sugar. Honey is an added sugar. So technically, according to those recommendations, now that doesn't mean to say if it's your birthday that you can't, put a little bit of sweetener in it. In Sugarproof, we like to use the natural sweetness of whole foods. We're not big on sweeteners like monk fruit or stevia, even if those ones which are naturally occurring. We just don't know what the short or long-term effects of them are going to be. And personally, I just don't like the taste of them. Okay. So if I'm going to make a plate of brownies for my kids or cookies for my kids or a birthday cake, I'll probably just use either some of the recipes in Sugarproof, which will use whole fruit like dates or bananas. And there you get the natural sweetness and the natural taste. Or I'll use healthy-ish sugar like coconut sugar we use, but we use much less of it. So you can cut back by half probably and still have a pretty decent product. Because another reason that I'm not big on sweeteners is the issue is just as much about sweetness as it is about sugar. So, we're all amped up to prefer this ultra sweet diet, right? But we don't need it. So we need to try and scale that back down because the more we're amped up on sweetness, the less we appreciate other foods. So the more we can dial back that sweetness, the more we can get our kids to appreciate other foods. So it's okay to make a birthday cake, cut back on the sugar, avoid the alternative sweeteners because much better to get the natural sweetness. What do you think, Emily? Did I miss anything there?
No, that's great. Yeah. And I just, I feel like there shouldn't really necessarily be hard and fast rules. I mean, when my kids were young enough to where they wouldn't care one way or the other what the cake was, I certainly wasn't going to go giving them some, super sweet cake with a bunch of frosting on it because I just found it to be unnecessary. And I didn't think, they would mind having a much healthier treat. So I would go that route. But as my kids have gotten a little bit older, I think, especially on their birthday, I want to know what they want. And sometimes it surprises me. So this last year, my 5-year-old really wanted carrot cake, and he loves this recipe that I came up with, which I can send to you if your son likes carrot cake. It doesn't have any added sugars in it, and it's really great. It's it's sweetened with bananas and some dates, and it's got shredded carrots and just all ingredients that I would give that I feel good about giving to him. My 8-year-old, his birthday came a couple of weeks later, and he wanted creme brulee, which I think maybe he's only had once before, but I guess it stuck out with him. So we made it, and I just put less sugar in it. But interestingly, he didn't finish it. So he had it. We put the candles in it. He had some of it, and he said, "Okay, I've had enough," and that was that. So I think you can kind of play these things by ear. But also, what you mentioned, I think about making sure that your kids are getting sort of something solid to eat before these special events is really important. So whether it's a birthday party that you're hosting or a party that, you're sending your kids to or you're attending as a family, just thinking about making sure that your kids have eaten something really solid that's healthy, savory wise first, so that whatever treats they may encounter don't end up making them feel bad, giving them a big sugar rush.
Yeah, I mean, there's ways to, to get around. Context is important in terms of timing. Also, just portion size. In our house we do mini dessert night, where we'll all get together and enjoy a small portion of dessert. Even if study research shows that if you serve dessert on a smaller plate, then people think it's perceived as a decent amount, and my kids don't grumble about it. They're just going to enjoy that small treat. I mean, we enjoy it as a kind of a family gathering in the evening. So there's lots of ways beyond what you actually put in the cake. Or the muffin or the cookie or whatever. There's ways to scale back and kind of diminish the sugar impact of it beyond what you actually put in it, in terms of when you serve it, how you serve it, where you serve it, and all that.
You're shedding light on the fact that we have so much pressure on ourselves to choose the right sugar, but no one's really talking about the fact that the cookie is the size of their face, and it could be a lot smaller. I love the use of small ramekins for like any type of like yogurt or gelato style. And I do tend to choose something that has a higher fat content just to get that satisfaction, versus something that, I remember back in the early 2000s when froyo was like a thing, and people would leave with a kid's sand bucket size of frozen yogurt covered in toppings and thinking to themselves like, this is fat free and it's only this many calories. And I'm looking at the sugar impact going, oh my gosh, what's happening? So it is a little bit, there are definitely ways to do that. And I think portion size.
Do you know what I learned from froyo? Because my kids are teenagers, but I have memories of froyo and negotiation, all that stuff.
Yeah.
What I learned from that I like to apply sometimes is kids love that process of putting stuff on top of things, right?
Yes.
Love that. But unfortunately in froyo, it's a bunch of junk usually. But you can apply that principle at home. Let's say if you're serving a breakfast cereal or a salad or even a pasta dish, you can, or a rice bowl or whatever, you can apply that principle of having kids put the toppings on. And kids like to do that. They like to choose and make their own little creation. So you can apply that principle in the kitchen as well.
I definitely feel like the more I get Sebastian involved, even we have a little kitchen helper stool that he climbs up in, and we're always kind of cooking together. It's an absolute disaster and a mess of our kitchen when we're done, but he will eat whatever he makes. Like we went to a farm, we picked bok choy. He sauteed the bok choy. He ate like 3 heads of bok choy. And I was just like, all right, we're doing this. But the more that he gets involved, the more he eats. And it can be on the healthy side of things and, maybe the sugary side of things too. But you bring up a really, really, really good point, because they just want food to be fun. They want to be involved in the process, and it doesn't have to be sugar to be fun. Speaking of which, do you guys have some like kid-approved sugar-proof recipes that you love that you think our listeners should look for in the book?
Yeah, I'll let Emily develop 39 recipes from the book. So I'll let her talk about that. So we have breakfasts, lunches, dinners, snacks, treats, dinners. So
yeah, my kids like. They've helped make most of them. And so they really enjoy that process. My 5-year-old right now really likes making the green sauce that's in the book. So he likes picking parsley from my parents' garden. And he likes operating the food processor these days. And he has a little stool. So he helps pick the parsley and he washes it and he puts it in the food processor with help and blends it up, and it has olive oil and capers and what else is in there? Olive oil, capers, garlic, and you can put a little lemon zest if you want.
And it's a very versatile sauce. I mean, you can throw that on anything and vastly improve its taste and appeal.
Mm-hmm. So he likes to have that on potatoes or other vegetables or on eggs. That's probably his favorite to make right now. And they also like gosh, they like helping make the sesame squares. Sesame treats are really easy. That's a no-bake recipe. They always like the chickpea snacks. They don't tend to get tired of those because we change the seasonings. Yeah, it's been fun. And I feel like I found ways to get them involved in the kitchen that don't make a whole bunch of extra work for me. So I figured out, what I can set them up with, like a little task station, and then they sort of do their thing and I do my thing and we work together. So they like, snapping asparagus, that ends off of that, or they're able to cut a lot of things now with, different, they've sort of progressed into being able to use different knives and I'm more comfortable now letting them do that at a little station without me hovering over quite as much.
Love that. I love that. What are, I know you guys have so many resources in the book and so many tips, but are there any other strategies or food swaps that families can adopt to like reduce their sugar? And what are some like the biggest culprits that you guys see in the majority of households?
I'd say beverages are a big culprit. Either juice or soda, neither of which we favor. So even juice, again, which sounds healthy, and many households kind of rely on it. It's not. It's just concentrated sugar. In fact, it could be more sugar in juice than soda. And most fruit juice is high in fructose. Could be even higher than high fructose corn syrup. So even 100% juice is not a great idea. So you can gradually reduce that by dilution. Again, most commercial juices are way too sweet anyway, and you can gradually scale back towards flavored water. So you can make flavored water. You can add a splash of juice to water just to get a bit of flavor. It might take some time, but you can do that. Sodas, just don't bring them into the house. That's the best tip there. I mean, kids are going to get sodas at birthday parties and when they go out with friends later to the mall or the coffee shop under pre-COVID conditions or wherever teenagers are going these days. So there's plenty of opportunities outside the house. Just don't bring it into the house and you can make a big impact there. We already talked about breakfast, which is another big place you can make easy swaps there, like breakfast cereal, for example. If your kids are hooked on a particular cereal, just try to find one lower in sugar. Aim for 3 grams of sugar or less, with fiber and protein as well, hopefully. And again, you can gradually scale it back. If your kids are hooked on Frosted Flakes or some other high sugar cereal, buy the plain one and just kind of sneak some of the plain ones in there and gradually go to the plain ones. Research studies actually show that kids are perfectly fine with low sugar cereals. Again, give them the choice to add something and they'll have plenty of fun throwing some berries on there or some chopped nuts or some flax seeds or whatever. And that's a way to up the nutritional quality of the breakfast cereal. So there's a lot in the book. We have lots of these hacks, simple tips that you can do at home to scale back on sugar while still enjoying sweet treats.
Yeah, I think cereal hasn't really been a thing based on like my obsession with blood sugar in our family. Ever really. I remember when I first started dating my husband and he would pound a box of cereal in the evenings, after a full dinner. He's a big guy. He could handle it. But he doesn't anymore at all. And it was only like, a year into dating where he didn't have that habit anymore because I'm sure I was like in his ear annoying him about all the impact it was having. But I think that is, you make a good point, but even just people thinking that they have to serve their children cereal.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Or like that it is the only breakfast option, just based on the fact that there are very few options that are balanced without sugar, and that's so unfortunate.
I'd rather have and eggs or something savory. There's plenty of savory breakfast ideas that we talk about.
Right.
You can easily even just enjoy a piece of toast or pancakes without drowning it in syrup or jam. And we have a lot of different suggestions for how to pivot those around. Those kind of typical high sugar culprits can be pivoted around to deliver something savory and something nutritious.
Definitely.
Definitely encourage thinking outside the box for breakfast and thinking about some of the more international options as well. We have an international breakfast challenge that we suggest where you get your kids involved in researching what other countries, what are some of the breakfast foods that are popular in other countries. Sort of coming to the realization that breakfast foods don't have to be so limited, and they can involve, things that we might associate more with lunch or dinner. So that's a fun one. And also adding to what Michael said, I think some of these prepackaged snacks can really be big culprits in the sense that they're not adding much nutrition to kids' diets. They're so convenient. So it's tempting, to think, give some fruit leather or, some of these graham cracker snacks or goldfish or, a lot of the popular granola bars that advertise as being whole grain and high fiber are actually really loaded with sugar. So we suggest looking closely at those and trying to come up with some easy alternatives that, families can rely on that are actually adding nutrition to snacks rather than just using them as sort of fillers to get kids through to the next meal.
Definitely. And it's perpetuating that blood sugar roller coaster. They're going to come walking in the door after whatever activity they were at with their sugary snack, wanting more.
Right?
Totally.
70% of processed foods and 80% of snacks marketed to children have added sugar in them. So pretty much, it's the exception to find something that isn't. So
Well, I love the recommendation that we should be looking for things with 3 grams of added sugar or less for children. I know that there are a lot of adult clients that I have that won't buy anything over 5 grams for themselves. And we're talking about sometimes a third of your size of your body or a fourth. They're really small little beings. If someone is over 2, if your child is over 2 and you realize, okay, they go to basketball practice and someone brings treats, or they do this or they do that, and they're coming in contact with this stuff. Are there recommendations for older age kids over 2 years old in regards to how much sugar they should be having? Is it based on their weight? Is it based on their age? What are the recommendations? And I'm sure we're all hoping for more stringent recommendations to come out soon, but what are your recommendations in regards to that?
Yeah, we came up with recommendations. Now it's hard for kids because they're growing. So you have a 2-year-old versus an 18-year-old. Obviously, it's very different. There's no existing guidelines that take into account that difference. But we came up with an approach based on age, based on standard energy requirements for each age between 2 and 18 years of age. So I said 0 added sugars. This doesn't count sugars from fruit or dairy. Those are unlimited. Just don't eat all the fruit at once. But after age 2, it goes up from about 10 or 12 grams of added sugars per day to about 20 for an 18-year-old or adult. That's about equivalent to 5% of daily energy needs, which is what the World Health Organization recommends, and is what the Scientific Advisory Committee recommended for the new dietary guidelines. So it might be that the new dietary guidelines, if they're released, will match what we have recommended in Sugarproof, which is a graded approach between 2 and 18 or adulthood.
Yeah, in the book in chapter 2, we have a chart that breaks it down by age and gender.
I love that. Resources for everyone before the government catches up.
Well, they probably will argue about it for a long time to come.
Yeah. Recommendations have lumped all kids together between ages 2 and 18. And really, that just doesn't make any sense.
No, that's ridiculous. Because we know the effect that sugar is having on children, and it's the dose makes the poison, but it also is based on the size and weight of the human. So, I'd love for you guys to go a little deeper into some of the impact that sugar is having. I know we're all facing and have been going through a major pandemic. We have flu season on the horizon. We know that sugar affects immunity. You talked about how it affects learning and development, the microbiome. What are some other, what in your research have you seen that sugar is affecting? Or are there any studies that you want to talk about from the book?
Let's see. We talked about fatty liver disease, brain development, diabetes, heart disease. We didn't talk about COVID in the book because COVID wasn't a thing. We finished the book late last year, but clearly it's relevant. Not so much research in children, but again, we know from adulthood, from studies in adults, that pre-diabetes and hyperglycemia, so high blood glucose, will impact severity of the response to COVID. And so the same is likely true for children. And that's because what happens is with high blood glucose, with poor diet, and with obesity, there's a systemic broad inflammatory response that's associated with that. And so what happens is because we have this broad state of inflammation just due to poor diet and excess body weight, when there is an infection, the body's immune response, instead of fighting the virus, it registers a broad immune response from the whole body. So it ends up fighting the inflammatory response in the body, and then damages the lungs or the heart or the brain, wherever there's inflammation. So we know that high sugar causes inflammation in the brain, high inflammation throughout the body. So when there is a real infection, the response to that infection becomes compromised.
So it's something we all need to be prioritizing, not only always, but specifically right now with what we're all facing with the pandemic. And
it's tough because we know that given the conditions in which we're all now forced to live, that comfort foods are important, and sometimes that's not the best nutrition. But on the other hand, we're eating out less, and our kids are home more, so we have a lot more opportunity if we have the time to help try and modify that to make it healthier whilst kids are at home more often. We're not rushing out the door at 6:30, 7 a.m. anymore, so we can take a bit more time to think about what a decent breakfast would look like. And then you can monitor how your kids are doing, because you'll see the energy crash, and you can then tinker that diet. So become a bit of a detective, become a little bit of a scientist yourself at home, and look to see the connection between what you gave your kids for breakfast and how they were doing that particular morning.
And how often they're asking for snacks, because I know a lot of us parents are really struggling with that, having kids at home all the time. They're constantly hungry and asking for snacks.
I'm dealing with that problem too. I've been working full time at home for 7 months, so I'm in there down in the kitchen hovering in the afternoon as well, looking for something to snack on.
So we make the point. I just wrote a blog post about this. I'm a single mom. I'm a widow. My husband died 2 years ago. So it does take some extra work up front to make sure your kids are eating well, but it ends up making things easier, at least for me, and I think for a lot of parents in the long run. So if you put a little extra effort into what you serve at breakfast and make sure there's protein and fiber and it's, really solid breakfast, yes, you might spend 10, 15 minutes extra, but then your kids won't be asking you for snacks every 30 minutes throughout the morning, and then won't be as irritable.
It's a good investment of time.
Exactly.
Well, I'm so sorry for your loss, Emily, but it does sound like you're super mom, doing it all and taking really good care of your kids.
No, I mean, but, we all have to make our choices of, what we prioritize. And I've just realized that we all feel so much better, and my kids are a lot easier to parent when eating well. And I think for all of us these days, it's, there's a lot on our minds as parents. And when you're eating better, it's like, it's all interconnected, right? You sleep better, you feel better, and everything just sort of starts to seem easier. Whereas if, things go out of whack and eating a lot of sweets and, staying up later and kids are up later and eating a bunch of dessert at night or whatever it is, it's just, we've all been sort of off routine. And so I think doing what you can to get your kids on a healthy routine in terms of food can make a big difference on everyone's stress levels.
Yeah. And it starts with us, and like really taking those habits into our own hands and getting really serious about our own health and being an example and bringing that stuff back into the house and trying to get on a routine so we aren't doing those pantry flybys in the afternoon. Speaking of which, you guys both have had your own health issues and health issues that are affected by food. How do you, and I'd love for you to touch on those, but how do you, I don't want to say self-soothe, but really not reward, but like take care of yourself in a way of, in a self-care way, without sugar?
You want to go ahead. Yeah.
I have PCOS, which I've known about since I was, in my late teens. Even if it wasn't formally diagnosed, I realized that I've had these issues and that I was always having these blood sugar emergencies. And I just kind of had accepted it. And I was a vegetarian and a vegan for a number of years, which in my case was not helping my situation because I was eating a lot of carbohydrates and I probably wasn't getting enough protein and healthy fat. And so once I started working in Michael's lab and learned more about the glycemic index and learning more about different strategies for maintaining my blood sugar, it's been such a big help for me. I hardly ever have those big blood sugar emergencies. And I don't really crave any of the things that I used to, want. And it does affect me. So I can't have like a bowl of oatmeal in the morning, for example. I know a lot of people are fine with that. I just, no matter what I put on it, and it just never works for me. So just, kind of have to accept, that's who I am. And then I think, people are different. So some people are better able to handle carbohydrates than I am. And I do eat carbohydrates, but I just have to really be careful with how I balance them. And, my kids, can have a little bit more, but I do apply some of those same strategies of thinking about balancing out carbohydrates, protein, and fat with them as well. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah. Blunt their blood sugar roller coaster experience. Yeah. Try to support their balance as much as possible. Yeah. I mean, it's a game-changing strategy for most people when they feel more balanced and less of a crash. There's less cravings. There's less of that need for a snack, less of a need for sugar. And you were able to have your boys without fertility treatments.
Right. Yeah. So I was, and that was a really encouraging thing. I should probably just explain, for those of you that don't know what this is, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome, and it ends up causing, can cause some hormonal imbalances, and it can lead you to have a high insulin response, which is what was happening with me. So I was responding in an exaggerated way to sugar and carbohydrates, and then having these big blood sugar crashes and just really not feeling well. So I've been able to work that out, thankfully.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so applicable for your book and for pulling out the sugar and getting everyone balanced.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. I love that. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, well, let's see where to begin. Well, I'm not, I don't eat a lot of sugar, but my big weak spot is French fries, pie of any kind, custard, because I'm a Brit, so custard with anything is good. But but that that's very occasional. And I'm in the morning. I don't drink coffee or alcohol. I haven't had alcohol in 10 years because I just didn't like the way it made me feel, and I felt like it was affecting my immune system. I drink Japanese sencha green tea, all day long, pretty much. Definitely in the morning. I fast 2 or 3 mornings a week just because I think it's good for cognitive health. And we just have a very balanced diet. We cook a lot at home together. We're cooking 5 or 6 nights a week now, and lots of veggies with the meal. Just healthy, balanced cooking. Don't eat a lot of processed foods. My weak spot is I get flare-ups. So I don't know if it's because I've stopped eating sugar, so I just become more sensitive to it. But I do get gout flare-ups, and I had that long. That's not it has this perception that it's a disease of aging, but I've had that for quite a while, and kids can get it too. And it goes back to the fructose, because that conversion of fructose that I talked about in the liver, it produces uric acid, and uric acid is what causes gout. So I'll get that if I have too much sugar all at once, including fruit. So if I have like a big bowl of fruit, which I would love to eat, I'll feel aching in my ankles within an hour or so. So that's kind of a trigger I have. That's a good reminder
that you've gone too far. I love that you just brought that up, because actually my first, I would say, non-weight loss body composition client when I started my practice back in 2012 was probably the 3rd person or the 4th person I saw was a college-age student with gout. And his doctor had said, remove red wine and remove red meat.
Yeah.
And that'll get rid of your uric acid.
Yeah.
And I looked at his diet and I went, he had just graduated college. He was a sales rep and he'd drive around. And all he ate was Sour Patch Kids. And I was like, this is not from the red meat. This is not from the red wine, which you aren't eating any of. This is absolutely from the Sour Patch Kid habit in the car, driving around from client to client. And it cleared up his gout. And it blows my mind that understanding isn't there.
It's not more commonplace. I mean, I think that's what my doctor said to me too. Was like, okay, you got to cut the red wine, the red meat. And I said, I don't drink and I don't eat meat. So, and he said, well, this is a mystery. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah. You're like, I can tell you.
But it's very, very underappreciated that fructose produces uric acid, and that's what causes gout. It's the buildup of uric acid crystals in the joints. So if your kids or your teens or you as an adult have achy joints, this could be the cause.
I love that. That's such great information. I know there are people listening that maybe don't have kids and they have gout, and you just gave them the knowledge to understand how to change it. Because I think people would automatically assume, I could eat a big plate of fruit in Hawaii, no problem. And then that might be you not playing tennis on the courts on your vacation because your hands are swollen with a flare.
Yeah.
Oh, crazy. Well, you guys both know that I'm pregnant and about to have baby number 2. I think we have to dive into sugar consumption and its impact on pregnancy. So I would love any advice you guys have on that.
Yeah, well, definitely studies show that the effects of sugars that we've been talking about, those effects can begin during gestation. So there is transfer of sugars to the baby. So that's why it's important also to maintain blood glucose during pregnancy. And I don't need to tell you, but that's not an easy task for women who are pregnant. But it's that knowledge should be useful to think about. But and then after that continues after pregnancy, because our research showed, and this is relatively new research, showed that also there's transmission of sugars through breast milk. And again, it's the fructose. So I mentioned earlier that fructose is not naturally present in breast milk because that's sugar is lactose, which is a glucose connected to a galactose. But our research shows that fructose from the diet can actually be transmitted into breast milk. And then we just published a paper last week, actually, that showed that early consumption of high fructose in early lactation had an impact on child development by 2 years of age. So again, some women threw up their arms and said, well, you should have told me that 10 years ago. But it's never too late. It's never too early to make those changes. And again, that doesn't mean to say you can't have fruit if you're lactating or you can't have fruit juice. You can, just space it out across the day, dilute the fruit juice, move towards more flavored drinks versus sweetened drinks. So there's ways you can get at that. So we actually, one of the earlier versions of the book was called Secondhand Sugars, because it was about how these impacts of sugar on development are kind of secondhand. It's inadvertent transmission from the mother or from the environment into the child. So that's important to know as well, and think about how what you're eating, not just whilst you're pregnant, but also whilst you're breastfeeding, what you're eating can impact in positive or negative ways. So there's all this research also on flavor transmission through breast milk. So that's also important.
You're impacting their palate, and you're impacting their I'm sure their microbiome and their liver and their brain all at the same time.
Yes.
It is I know it can be a stressful time for women. They cannot feel great. They can have food aversions. They can be very stressed with a newborn. But I think the more that we can give people the tools to just have those high quality nutrients in their diet that make them feel full, that balance their blood sugar, or even just give them the science behind why those other foods are so helpful, can make people motivated to put
a few clean things on their plate. The knowledge and the information is useful. How you apply that to your own situation, because everybody's situation, everybody's context is very individual. So I think that's the way nutrition's going anyway. It's all about individual situation. I mean, not just your individual metabolism and your individual genes, but your individual context of where you're living, where you're sourcing food, and how you're eating, what type of diet you're eating. You have to apply it to your own personal situation. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But we're all here just to give people the resources and the tools to eat more healthy proteins, fats, fibers, plants, things that lock up that sugar so that it's naturally occurring and slow to be released instead of mashing into their brain and body. Yes. Well, gosh, it was such a pleasure to have you guys on the show today. I'm so excited for the parents out there and the future parents out there to have Sugarproof as a resource for their journey throughout parenthood, and just really to motivate them to take one of your challenges. Where can people follow along? Where can they find the book? How can they learn about the challenges you guys are putting on? I mean, I love your Instagram, so I think they should start there for sure too, after they buy the book. So those little bite-sized tips are really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. So the Instagram feed is at Sugarproof Kids. And then our website is sugarproofkids.com. And the book is available anywhere where you're sourcing books these days, in whichever format of books you like to consume, hardback, Kindle, or audio. It's available in all those sources from anywhere that you're sourcing books.
Great. I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to publish the book, write the book, get it published, get it into our hands. It's, a lot easier to hand your kid a muffin and see the smile than it is to think about what you're going to make and take a little extra time, but it's worth it in the end. And you guys are out there banging the drum, and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for all you're doing, and best wishes to you for your birthday on Friday and your newborn in a few weeks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Best of luck for that.
I appreciate you both. Well, we'll let you know when this hits the airwaves, and we'll send assets, and it'll go up as an IGTV, and we'll do a blog post with it, and link to the book and your website and your Instagram and all that good stuff. So I just really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.